Everyone laughed when a bankrupt billionaire CEO adopted a homeless girl. Then he learns she's a genius. A bankrupt millionaire stood in the freezing rain and saw a little girl selling paper animals to survive. He thought he was saving her, but she was about to change everything he believed about failure, genius, and the meaning of love. What happens when the most broken man meets the most brilliant child? Stay with me, because this story will melt your heart. James Reynolds used to live 52 floors above the streets of Chicago, in a penthouse of marble glass and silence. He had everything: stocks, skyscrapers, respect. At one point his name gleamed in gold letters on the side of a building downtown: Reynolds Financial Group. It stood as a symbol of brilliance, built from scratch by a man who once believed numbers could solve everything. But on this bitter December night, James wasn't in the penthouse. He was in a crumbling apartment with a leaky faucet and peeling paint, swirling the last of his $100 whiskey in a chipped tumbler, wearing a sweater too thin for the Chicago cold. Outside his window, the city's skyline glittered like a cruel reminder. The very towers he helped finance now looked down at him with indifference. He was 58, alone, forgotten, betrayed. His downfall hadn't been loud. It had been elegant, precise, engineered by the very man he had called his best friend for over 30 years, Victor Blackwood, a name James now only whispered through clenched teeth. One day he was on Forbes covers. The next he was escorted out of his own boardroom, shares plummeting, empire collapsing, betrayed by backdoor transfers and offshore shell companies too intricate for the public to trace. But James saw it all. And now he could see himself, reflected in the dark window. Eyes hollow, skin lined with regret, a body once powerful now sagging under the weight of irrelevance. He raised his glass in a mock toast to no one. "To empire builders," he muttered. His doctor had warned him that morning, "Your blood pressure is out of control. You either start living or start dying." So James stood, slowly, bones aching. "Tomorrow," he told himself, "tomorrow I walk outside. I do something, anything. I remember who I used to be, before money became my identity." But what James didn't know was that tomorrow would be the start of everything he never knew he needed. It began with the rain. Not the gentle kind that kisses your skin, but the brutal, slanting kind that seeps into your bones, that turns Chicago's streets into rivers of gray and misery. James walked aimlessly, his worn coat clinging to him like a memory he couldn't shake. People passed him like he was invisible, until he saw her. A girl, no older than 8, curled up beneath the awning of a boarded-up bookstore. She sat cross-legged on cardboard, hands red from cold, face too still for someone so young. But it wasn't her poverty that stopped him. It was what she was selling. In front of her lay dozens of tiny paper creatures, foxes, cranes, elephants, all folded with precision and care. Origami, not a single one was torn. He would have kept walking, everyone else had. But at the exact moment he passed, the girl looked up. Their eyes met, and James froze. Hers were wide, alert, ancient, eyes that had seen too much, eyes that saw him. "Would you like to buy one, sir?" she asked, calm, steady. No desperation, no pity. "They're $1 each, but they'll last forever, if you keep them dry." It was such a simple thing, but something about her tone, a mixture of childhood innocence and hard-earned wisdom, pierced through him like glass. He knelt down beside her. "Did you make these?" he asked, his voice raspier than he expected. "Yes, sir," she nodded. "The fox is my favorite, but the crane is harder." He picked up a small, perfect fox. "What's your name?" "Sophia," she replied, brushing water off a stack of animals. "What's yours?" He hesitated. "James." "Nice to meet you, James." It had been a long time since anyone had said his name like that, with no expectations, no shame, no memory of what he'd lost. He glanced down the street and noticed 2 men watching them from across the intersection. Something in their posture made his stomach twist. "Where are your parents, Sophia?" "My grandma's in the hospital," she said. "I'm just taking care of things." and she said it like she believed it was her job to take care of the world. James felt something rise in him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in decades. It was foreign, but it was real. "How much for everything?" he asked suddenly. "All of them," she blinked. "In 2:30, she said. "I have 23 pieces today." He handed her 2 20s. "Keep the change," he said, "and let's get you something to eat." At the diner, she ate like she hadn't eaten in days, because maybe she hadn't. While she devoured her sandwich, she idly doodled on a napkin. James glanced over. But what he saw wasn't doodling. It was math. Formulas. Equations. Elegant, complex structures that didn't belong on a napkin from a cheap diner. Numbers that pulsed with logic and rhythm and genius. "What's that?" he asked. "Just going to cover," he said, "covering them. They help me think." James felt something shift inside him, something ancient and tender and long forgotten. That night he did something that shocked even himself. He offered her his couch. "Just for the night. I have an extra room," he explained awkwardly. "It's just my office. But it's warm, it's dry, and you'll be safe." He stared at him for a long time. "He was," she asked. "Why would you help me?" To James, once a man who controlled billions, but had no one left to call, found himself whispering, "Because I know what it feels like when the world walks right by." And he meant every word. That night, as she slept curled on his office couch, clutching her backpack like a lifeline, James Reynolds stood in the doorway and made a silent vow to never walk past again. Because somewhere between failure and redemption, between origami foxes and mathematical napkins, James had just met the one person who could change his life forever. And her name was Sophia. Section 1. The Paper Fox and the Broken Man. The storm had passed, but the city was still soaked in grief. James Reynolds awoke earlier than usual, not to emails or investors or market alarms, but to the sound of soft breathing from the next room. He moved quietly, unsure of what he'd find or feel. The office, once a shrine to his former life, lined with leather-bound ledgers and forgotten dreams, had been hastily converted the night before. A pillow on the pull-out sofa, a folded blanket, a small figure curled in it, still clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Sophia. For a brief, terrifying second he feared she might be gone. But she stirred beneath the blanket, murmuring something inaudible, her brow furrowed in sleep. Her defenses were down, and for the first time she looked like the child she was, not the wise-eyed little warrior he'd met in the rain. James backed out of the room and stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee maker. He didn't know how to be around children, didn't know what they ate, didn't know what they needed beyond what couldn't be bought. His empire had taught him to control everything. He could predict markets, hedge risk, negotiate with sharks, but here he was, paralyzed by the idea of breakfast. He opened the fridge, expired milk, half a lemon, and a forgotten jar of Dijon mustard. That was it. He muttered under his breath, "Oh, what exactly constitutes a balanced breakfast?" A voice behind him answered softly, "Eggs." He turned. Sophia stood in the doorway, her hair slightly matted from sleep, her clothes rumpled, but her eyes wide awake. "Grandma used to make scrambled eggs," she said, walking up to the fridge, "before she got sick." James stepped aside wordlessly, as she took out the egg carton and cracked 2 into a bowl with steady hands. "You shouldn't have to cook," he said, his voice low. Sophia shrugged. "We all do what we need to do." And there it was again, that clarity, that wisdom beyond her years. He stared at her, not with pity, but with awe. Who was this child? They ate quietly, the scrambled eggs over toasted bread slightly burnt from his inexperience. But Sophia ate every bite. Later that morning, James made a call. "Rebecca Harper," he said when the voice answered, "I need a favor." Rebecca arrived with suspicion in her step and sarcasm in her voice. She was a social worker who had once lambasted Reynolds Financial for its cold, number-driven philanthropy. And here I thought hell would freeze before James Reynolds asked me to help a child. Sophia watched her from behind a curtain. This isn't a publicity stunt. Rebecca studied his tired eyes, the worn cardigan, the lack of pretense. Then she saw Sophia, and something softened in her. They spoke in the kitchen while Sophia drew quietly in the other room. "This is highly irregular," Rebecca said. "You're not registered as a foster guardian. She should be in state care." "She has no one else," James interrupted. "Her grandmother's in the hospital. She's been surviving on her own." Rebecca looked toward Sophia. "And you want to keep her here?" "I want her to be safe." "You're not exactly stable yourself, Jim." "I'm not. But I'm willing." Silence stretched between them. Then Rebecca surprised him. "You always hid behind spreadsheets and data. But this is human. And it's good." The next 72 hours were a blur. Judge appeared in court, requesting temporary guardianship. The judge, a man who once shook his hand at a gala and now barely recognized him, asked with raised eyebrows, "Mr. Reynolds, what could a man who has lost everything offer this child?" James almost faltered. But then he felt it. Sophia's small hand slipped into his. That simple, quiet act steadied him, and the words rose in his throat like a promise. "A second chance for both of us." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Rebecca dropped her clip. The judge blinked. "Are you saying you wish to adopt her?" "Yes," James said. "Permit." That night, after they returned to the apartment with temporary approval, Sophia sat cross-legged on the rug, folding a new paper fox with the same precision as always. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "You didn't have to." James hesitated. "Because sometimes we don't choose who changes our lives. They just show up. In the rain with a fox made of paper." He smiled. Just slightly. It was the first time he'd seen her do that. The weeks that followed weren't easy. James was no longer the man he once was, the man with assistants, chefs, and order. Now he was Googling how to make lasagna and getting lost in aisles of children's toothpaste. Sophia, for her part, adjusted with eerie resilience. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. But James often heard her at night, whimpering in her sleep, fighting invisible battles with tangled sheets and trembling limbs. The Fernetti froze. By the third, he learned to simply sit beside her bed, his presence enough to bring her back from whatever darkness chased her. One morning, while changing her sheets, he found something that broke his heart. Food. Chicken crackers, cereal bars, small apples wrapped in napkins, carefully preserved, hoarded, protected. "Sophia," he asked gently, "why are you hiding food?" He looked away. "Sometimes people change their minds. I didn't want to be hungry." He knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You'll never go hungry here, I promise." But she kept hiding food in new places. And he realized some wounds don't heal with promises. They heal with time. James began to transform the apartment, quietly, subtly. Gone were the investment journals and mahogany symbols of wealth. In came shelves of children's books and advanced math texts. A corner of the living room became her origami station. The fridge door, once pristinely empty, now held her school papers, each marked with a proud red A. The once cold apartment was becoming a home, and so was he. One day, James received a call from the school. "This is Mrs. Winters, Sophia's math teacher." The voice said coldly. "He needs to learn bound." James stiffened. "What happened?" "She corrected me, publicly, suggested a new method of solving equations." He blinked. "Was she wrong?" "No, she was right. But that's not the point." That night, James sat with Sophia on the living room floor. "You can't just tell teachers they're wrong," he said gently. "But she was," Sophia replied, her voice small. James reviewed her workbook. The method she'd created wasn't just accurate, it was beautiful, simple, efficient. "You're brilliant," he said, "but brilliance needs a voice people can hear." He nodded. Slowly. That night, after she fell asleep, James stood at the window. He looked out, not with the eyes of a man who had lost everything, but as a father who had just begun to discover what truly mattered. He remembered the day he met her. Rain falling. Origami foxes. Eyes that saw him before he even saw himself. And he whispered to no one in particular. This is what legacy looks like. Section 2. The equation no one could solve. James Reynolds once solved billion-dollar equations in his sleep. He could calculate projected earnings, hedge against market downturns, and deconstruct IPO proposals faster than his competitors could blink. His brilliance had earned him wealth, power, headlines. But tonight, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his modest apartment, staring at the scrawled numbers on a napkin, written by an 8-year-old girl, he realized he was completely out of his depth. It had started during lunch. Sophia had been unusually quiet that afternoon, poking at her sandwich with the distracted focus of someone whose mind was working in a different galaxy. "Something wrong?" James asked, setting down his coffee mug. "I'm thinking," she replied without looking up. He smiled. "About?" He paused, then held up a napkin covered in looping numbers and sharp notations. "Something doesn't make sense." James took it, expecting childhood math. Instead, he found calculus. No, beyond calculus. Layered theories he hadn't seen since his brief flirtation with algorithmic modeling back in grad school. But this was cleaner, smarter. It was like watching Mozart compose music, except with numbers. "I've been reviewing some financial records," Sophia continued casually, like she was talking about her favorite TV show. "From your old company." James's heart stopped. "Sophia, how did you get the public filings, archived reports, and your old laptop?" He blinked. "You accessed encrypted documents." He shrugged. "They weren't encrypted well." He didn't know whether to be furious or impressed, but before he could respond, she dropped a sentence that made the air vanish from the room. "Your company didn't collapse because of bad investments, James. It collapsed because someone designed it to." That night, while the city outside buzzed in oblivion, Sophia unfolded the layers of her theory like petals of a flower. James listened, stunned, as she outlined subtle anomalies in trade patterns, delayed reaction times in risk algorithms, and buried transaction trails. "I noticed a mathematical rhythm in the way Reynolds' financial declined," she said, gesturing at a hand-drawn graph pinned to the wall. "It wasn't random." "It was sabotage," James whispered. "Yes," she nodded. "Deliberate, controlled. Time. Black," he said aloud, finally giving shape to the storm he'd tried to bury. "I think so," Sophia said. "But he didn't just steal money. He planted an algorithm, one that would crash the system in waves. A domino effect that made it look like a market failure." James sank onto the couch, his pulse thundering in his ears. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because no one believes you," she said quietly. "But I do. And I can prove it." The next morning, James made 2 calls. One was to Sarah Lawson, his former lead systems architect, the only person who had refused Blackwood's golden parachute. The second was to a local electronics supplier. By noon, his storage closet had become something entirely new. Sophia called it Project Phoenix. Within a week, their apartment pulsed with new energy. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in equations, flowcharts, and data timelines. Sophia designed code on James's old laptop faster than most professionals could blink. "This is your algorithm?" Sarah asked during her first visit, staring at the cascading code on screen. Sophia nodded. "It's a pattern recognition tool for financial anomalies." "She built this?" Sarah whispered to James. "She's 8, he said, "and she's rewriting the rules." Zara joined them immediately, off the books. He didn't ask for pay. He asked for justice. But not everyone was pleased. 2 weeks into their covert operation, Rebecca Harper, a social worker who had approved Sophia's adoption, requested an emergency meeting. "It's about Sophia," she said over the phone, her voice oddly clipped. James agreed to meet at a quiet cafe overlooking Millennium Park. He arrived first, scanning the crowd with a broker's instincts now honed by fear. When Rebecca finally arrived, her eyes were tired. Her hands shook slightly as she held her cup. "Is everything okay?" James asked, trying to sound casual. "I've received concerns," she said. "What kind of concerns?" "Your home may not be a suitable environment." James's heart clenched. "Who told you that?" "I can't say, but it involves unusual electronic activity, late hours, and your connection with a former employee, Sarah Lawson." James exhaled slowly. They were being watched. Rebecca leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "So are you." That night, James installed a new security system. At 2:13 a.m., it triggered. Footsteps. A luck pick. A woman entering silently with a camera and small listening devices. Rebecca. James and Sarah watched her from the system's hidden feed. She moved quickly, expertly, planting devices under shelves behind curtains, until she entered Sophia's room. "Ujenpa." "I'm going back," he said. Sarah caught his arm. "What are you going to do?" "Welcome our guest." When Rebecca emerged into the living room, she nearly dropped her equipment at the sight of James sitting calmly on the couch, tea in hand. "Working late?" he asked. Her face drained of color. "I was told to." "We recorded everything," James said. "Every minute." He collapsed into the armchair. "He made me do it." "Lockwood." He nodded. "He has something on me, mistakes from years ago. He threatened to ruin me." "What does he want?" James demanded. "He wants to wipe out Sophia." James's blood ran cold. "He thinks she's dangerous, that she knows too much." He stood. "You're leaving." "No." Rebecca looked broken. "I never wanted to hurt her." "But you did," James said. "Now go, and take your bucks with you." But later that night, James found Sophia in their workspace, rebooting their systems with calm efficiency. "He's watching us," she said without looking up. "We need a new plan." James swallowed hard. "You're not afraid?" Sophia finally turned. Her voice was quiet. "I lived on the streets, James. I know what fear is, but I also know this. If we stop now, he wins." And that was the moment James realized he wasn't just solving equations. It was the equation no one could solve. Not Blackwood, not Wall Street, not even fate. Session 3, the safe house and the storm. Set to Quoisin AE. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. James Reynolds jolted awake, breath catching in his throat. Adrenaline kicked in before thought. He reached instinctively for Sophia, bursting into her room. He was already sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Dad?" she mumbled, barely awake. He knelt beside her. "Cody Phoenix?" Her eyes flew open, alert. No questions, no hesitation. In one swift motion, she reached for her pre-packed emergency bag under the bed. Shoes, flashlight, notebook, backup hard drive. Inside the room, they heard it. Heavy footsteps, multiple. James grabbed her hand. "Stay close." They slipped silently through the back hallway and into the building's service stairwell, hearts thudding in time with their hurried steps. James's phone buzzed with a silent security alert. Front door breach, multiple unidentified subjects. He didn't need to guess who had sent them. Victor Blackwood was done watching. Now he was hunting. 3 blocks south, a gray sedan idled with its headlights off. Sarah Lawson opened the door as they approached. "They found us faster than expected," she said grimly. James slid into the back seat with Sophia, pulling her close. They activated the surveillance remotely. "They know it's her," Sarah whispered. "They know how dangerous she is to them." Sophia said nothing. She stared straight ahead, her fingers clutching her backpack like armor. James turned to Sarah. "Initiate separation protocol." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's the only way." Their safe house was tucked above a bookstore on a quiet residential street, a relic from a gentler time. The windows were narrow, the locks were manual. It didn't look like much. That was the point. Inside, the apartment smelled like old paper and lemon polish. The bookseller below was a family friend of Sarah's, retired, hard of hearing, and blissfully unaware of the quiet war brewing upstairs. Sophia immediately unpacked her workstation. James set up perimeter alarms and blackout curtains. Sarah rewired the router. They moved like professionals. But it was clear, they were rattled. "Dad?" Sophia asked quietly as she placed a framed photo of them beside her temporary desk. "How long do we stay here?" James crouched beside her, trying to steady his breath. "Not long. But we're splitting up." He nodded. "Draw their focus. You and Sarah finish the algorithm." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not telling me everything." James didn't want to answer. But Sophia, his daughter, deserved the truth. "My blood pressure's spiking again. The doctor warned me. One more crisis could—" He trailed off. Her face tightened. "So you're protecting me by risking you?" "It's what fathers do." He threw his arms around him fiercely. "Then promise me something. Anything. You'll take your medicine, and you'll come back. I promise." They separated at dawn. James checked into a downtown hotel using his real name. No more hiding. If Blackwood wanted a target, he'd make himself easy to find. Every movement he made, the lobby, the cafe, the financial district, was calculated misdirection. He left a digital breadcrumb trail wide enough to keep all eyes on him. Meanwhile, Sophia and Sarah vanished into the quiet quarters of the city. Their communications were reduced to Sophia's code-based posts on an obscure online forum for math prodigies. Each message was disguised as an academic problem. James would solve it nightly, translating the updates hidden within the equations. One weekend he received a post that read, algorithm at 73% parameters expanding. We're safe." James smiled for the first time in days. But the separation took a toll. He stopped sleeping. His hands trembled when he signed checks. The staff at the hotel grew accustomed to seeing a tall man in a suit staring for hours out the lobby windows, like he was waiting for a ghost. During a staged interview with a journalist, another layer of distraction, James suddenly collapsed, clutching his chest. The world tilted. Sirens wailed. He woke up in the cardiac unit of Chicago General, wires snaking out of his body, machines beeping like metronomes. His first thought wasn't pop. It was Sophia. Had she seen the news? Was she safe? Was their system still working? With trembling fingers he reached for the hospital's tablet and opened the forum. New problem had been put under Sophia's alias. He solved it in under a minute. The solution read, "We're safe. Algorithm at 87%. Focus on recovery." Tears welled in his eyes. Even separated by miles and fear, their conduct remained unbroken. Two men in dark suits lingered outside his hospital room. Blackwood's surveillance hadn't diminished, it had intensified. Good, James thought. Let them watch me. Every hour they watched him was an hour Sophia was left alone. From his hospital bed, James began rebuilding his network. Old colleagues, investors, analysts who had once been victims of Blackwood's schemes. Some refused to listen. Others, especially those who had lost everything, leaned in. By week's end, James had formed a silent coalition. Men and women willing to speak, to testify. All they needed now was proof. 2 more forum posts followed. Figure out them at 94%, nearly complete. Then, next move must be precise, system ready. James was released from the hospital with stern warnings from his cardiologist. No, he laughed. Wrong year for that. That night their reunion was arranged in Sarah's office, after hours, behind locked doors and firewall protection. When James walked in, Sophia looked up from her screen. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, but her eyes filled with joy. "Hospital food," he replied, dropping into the seat beside her. He checked his wrist for the blood pressure monitor. "Still taking your meds?" "Relegate." Sarah entered with a folder. "It's finished." They all leaned in. Sophia's algorithm wasn't just complete. It was revolutionary. It traced every hidden asset, identified fraud signatures, and backtracked nearly 94% of the stolen money. Blackwood's empire was a glass house, and they now held the first stone. But the plan couldn't end with revelation. It would needed a climax. Move so public, so undeniable, that Blackwood couldn't bury it with power, money, or PR spin. "We force his hand," James said. "How, Sarah and us?" "By baiting him." Sophia looked up. "We let him think he's winning." James nodded. "We give him the illusion of safety, while we tear the floor out from under him." As night fell over Chicago, their plan unfolded on laptops, notebooks, and whispered calculations. The safe house buzzed with a quiet storm of purpose. They weren't just fighting to expose a crime. They were fighting to change the world. And as James tucked Sophia into bed, she whispered, "Do you think people like him ever stop?" James shook his head. "No. But people like us don't stop either." "Then we win," she said simply, turning onto her side. James watched her breathe, the gentle rhythm of a child whose genius had already shaken the foundations of an empire. And he realized they weren't in hiding. They were preparing for war. Section 4, The Ghost in the Glass Tower. The elevator to the Chicago Financial Center still chimed the same way. Same scent of leather polish and overpriced espresso. Same high-gloss walls reflecting ambition back at itself. But as James Reynolds stood inside that sleek silver box, ascending toward the 42nd floor, he wasn't the man who had once called this building his kingdom. That man had died in the ashes of betrayal. What stood here now was a ghost. But ghosts don't stay dead forever. Sometimes they come back to haunt. The lobby had fallen into silence the moment he walked in. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Phones lowered. Eyes widened. James Reynolds. Once the titan of finance, now resurrected. He didn't stop to greet anyone. He didn't explain. He simply existed, and that was enough to ignite the whispers. "Is that really him? I thought he moved to Europe. Wasn't he blacklisted?" No, he was patient. And now he was back. The cover story had been simple, crafted by Sarah with Sophia's encryption skills. James was returning to the industry in a consulting role at a mid-tier analytics firm, a move low enough to avoid suspicion, yet visible enough to make Victor Blackwood twitch. It worked. By lunchtime, surveillance teams had doubled. Blackwood's people were rattled. That night, back at the safe house, Sophia was already analyzing the ripple effect. His trading patterns were panicking, she said, eyes scanning cascading code. Moving funds in erratic batches. Squidding, hiding, rerouting. Sarah leaned in. Desperation makes people sloppy. James nodded. It's time we gave him something to fear. The investment strategies conference was always a spectacle. Sleek suits, overinflated egos, and backroom deals disguised as lectures. James hadn't attended in 3 years. Now he was the last-minute keynote. The headline, Collaborator Clarity, redefining financial transparency in the age of algorithms. But what it really meant was, I'm coming for you, Victor. The ballroom was a sea of skepticism. Rows of hedge fund managers, analysts, journalists, and venture capitalists who'd once written James off as a has-been. They weren't expecting brilliance, which made what happened next unforgettable. James's presentation began slowly. Conservative slides, familiar terminology. And he flipped the screen. And what followed was a mathematical ballet. Graphs twisted into new shapes. Trends sharpened. Projections inverted. He broke down fraud indicators, anomaly timelines, and predictive sabotage markers that eerily mirrored the collapse of Reynolds Financial. He never names, he knew, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Blackwood. Victor Blackwood was sitting in the back row, champagne flute in hand, face a mask of casual indifference. Until Sophia's algorithm, a simplified version stripped of identifiers, appeared on screen. His fingers tightened around the glass. James gestured toward the model. These patterns are not theoretical. They're replicable, predictable, and devastating. Silence swallowed the room. Then, fascinating theories, Reynolds, but isn't this just sour grapes? Blackwood. He strolled to the microphone, expression smug. Failed executives often blame manipulation when their empires crumble. Perhaps you simply weren't as brilliant as you thought. James smiled. Perhaps, but math doesn't lie. He clicked to the next slide. Sophia's algorithm bloomed like digital fire across the screen. And the out of the room leaned forward. Your model's variable weighting is flawed, Sophia. From the second row, dressed in a navy blazer, hair pulled back in a braid. He stood beside James holding a stack of papers. I can show you why. Blackwood's face paled. The girl from the charity dinner. The one he'd dismissed as a child. Now standing in front of a crowd of financial titans, correcting his company's signature model with grace, clarity, and devastating accuracy. Walter Simmons, a hedge fund legend, peered over his glasses. Let her speak. Sophia walked to the whiteboard. With nothing but a marker, she shattered Blackwood's algorithm in 4 steps. The ranking. That night in their temporary HQ, James debriefed Sarah, while Sophia worked silently in the background. He's spiraling, Sarah confirmed, moving assets at breakneck speed. Sophia looked up, which is exactly what we needed. She clicked open a folder. We've tracked and recorded every He pointed at a highlighted string of account numbers. He offered you half, didn't he? James froze. How did he? What's what someone like him would do? She turned to him, eyes solemn. If the money back, no accountability, just enough to silence you. Sarah watched carefully. What did you say? James exhaled. No deal. That night, in the quiet glow of their workspace, James sat beside Sophia as she finalized her presentation for... You know, he said softly, I used to think legacy meant buildings with your name on them. He smiled. The next room. The Securities and Exchange Commission welcomed 2 unusual visitors. A weathered former CEO and a 9-year-old girl with a laptop. For the next 2 hours, Sophia explained fraud markers, algorithmic weaknesses, and real-time tracking of illegal assets with a level of clarity that left the entire office breathless. By noon, the wheels of justice were turning. Search warrants, asset freezes, international alerts. Blackwood's empire had been caught in Sophia's mathematical net. And he didn't even know it yet. That night, James stood on the roof of the building where he once owned a penthouse. He looked out over Chicago no longer as a fallen king, but as a father, a warrior, a man reborn. Sophia joined him quietly. Everything's changing. Yes, he said, but this time we get to decide how. It began with a knock. Not the kind that rattled doors or demanded attention. It was softer, polite, almost practiced. James opened the door of the downtown apartment he and Sophia had temporarily moved into. Carefully selected, thoroughly swept for bugs. Outside stood a man in a steel gray suit. He didn't introduce himself. He just handed James a sealed envelope. Mr. Blackwood would like to resolve this matter amicably. James took it without a word, the paper heavier than it should have been. Inside, a short sock. A light, clean, venomous beneath the civility. Mr. Reynolds, let's not drag the past through the mud any further. I'm offering to repatriate 50% of the assets in question, approximately $4,700,000,000, 0 cents. Quietly. No courts, no media, no more theater. In return, you walk away. No prosecution, no exposure, no more meetings with regulators or reporters. Just peace, safety, a new beginning for you and your... You have 48 hours. Sophia was waiting at the desk when James returned. She saw the envelope in his hand and didn't need to ask. It would be the price of silence, she said quietly. He didn't flinch, just nodded. That's how much your life is worth to him. No, James said, that's how much you are. That night, the room was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of Sophia's laptop and the muffled wind pushing against the window pane. He looked up from the I could say yes, James said. Sophia's pencil froze mid-equation. It's more than enough to fund a foundation, a school, scholarships. We could do real good. Her eyes searched his face. But it's not justice, he said. It's a payoff, a bribe dressed as mercy. Sophia was silent for a moment. Then she slid a paper across the table. On it, a new algorithm. More than fraud detection, this one anticipated moves, like a chess AI built for warfare. It predicted his responses based on financial urgency, she said. Right now, his panic curve is steep. If we say no, he'll escalate. James nodded, which means we get him to make a mistake. The next day, James returned to the building he once owned. He stepped onto the same rooftop terrace where he'd once toasted to market wins and mergers. Now he stood face to face with Victor Blackwood for the first time in 3 years. Victor still had that same predatory calm, like a man used to buying outcomes. But this time he didn't smile. 50%, he said, final offer. And you walk away unpunished. No one gets everything they want, Ramos. I didn't come for everything. Blackwood squinted. James leaned closer. I came for truth, and to see your face when the world realizes who you really are. Victor's jaw tightened. Be careful, James, you're playing with fire. You and your little protege. Funny, James replied. She said the same about you. Blackwood's eye twitched, just enough to betray what James needed to see. Sophia. He turned and left without another word. The game had changed. That night, Sophia posted her most complex equation yet on the Prodigy forum. Hidden within the solution was a single phrase. A blink. 2 days later, a federal subpoena was issued. Journalists were notified. Regulators moved faster than expected, and Blackwood started making calls. But not to lawyers. To enforcers. James began noticing shadows, black SUVs parked near the safe house, unfamiliar faces in elevators. Sarah confirmed it. Blackwood had activated personal security contractors, former intelligence officers turned silent mercenaries. They're not here to make threats, she said. They're here to clean up loose ends. James looked at Sophia. She was typing as if nothing had changed. You're not worried. I'm calculating. He raised an eyebrow. She turned her laptop so he could see. It was a network map tracking the digital movement of Blackwood's entire web of shell companies, proxies, and asset funnels. Ruth appended. James's heart pounded. If we intercept that, it's over. Then let's intercept it, she said simply. They called the operation Last Light. It was Sophia's idea. Because even in collapse, she said, there's always one last light, and we're it. They would use the algorithm to predict the transfer time. Sarah would reroute the financial trail to the authorities in real time. James would go public on camera with the evidence and Sophia's algorithm. No more silence. No more fear. Just one final push. The night before the operation, James sat beside Sophia as she rechecked every line of code. You're not nervous? He asked. He shook her head. I'm focused. He smiled. You remind me of someone I used to know. Your younger self. No, he said. My better self. He paused. You really could have taken that deal. I really couldn't, he replied, because if I did, I'd still be the man I used to be, the one who thought wealth was the goal, not worth. Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. And let's finish this.
Session 6. Last Light. Point minimum 7 hours. The apartment was silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of keys. Sophia's eyes flicked rapidly between screens, 4 of them arranged in a semicircle around her. Each window displayed different data sets: offshore fund movements, security certificates, transactional hash sequences. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. To her, it was symphonic. Sarah Lawson sat at the edge of the makeshift command center, jaw tight, fingers cradling a ceramic mug long since gone cold. James stood by the window, watching the rain fall in heavy sheets against the city skyline. It was a storm night. Fitting. Routing protocol is live, Sophia said. Encrypted packets will begin transferring into the SEC's server at 1941 hours, synchronized with the Panama transfer window. James turned. Will it hold? She nodded. It has to. Sarah added, the feds are on standby. They'll begin the trace when the first fraudulent account pings the shadow registry. I won't elaborate. It works, James murmured. Blackwood's empire collapses before sunrise. Sophia didn't look up. It will work. 6 times. 9 minutes, 6 hours. James walked into the hallway and closed the door behind him. He let out a long, slow breath. His chest still ached from the last hospital scare. The stress was relentless. The doctors had warned him. Again. But this wasn't something he could step away from. This was his legacy. Not the buildings with his name in gold, not the private jets, not the long... This mission, this girl, this moment. He looked down at the photo tucked into his wallet. It wasn't of his past, it was of Sophia, the day she'd been accepted into the university's special program, holding her acceptance letter, beaming, unaware that the world would soon try to silence her. I won't let them, he whispered. 4 hours. Sophia paused mid-typing. Dad, she said, can I ask you something personal? Of course. She didn't look at him. But if anything ever happens to me, would you finish it? Would you still share the algorithm? James froze. No matter what? He walked over, knelt beside her. Don't you imagine that? Imagine that. Her voice was steady. We have to, because he's watching. And if we pull this off, he loses everything. And people like him don't just lose, they fight. James's jaw tightened. I will protect you with my last breath, he said. I know, she whispered. But this is bigger than either of us. 2 hours. Just over 2 hours. James's phone buzzed. A blocked number. She answered, voice like cold steel. You still have time to reconsider, Reynolds. It was Victor Blackwood. Half the money. A trust for the girl. I even spoke with someone at MIT. They'll fast-track her. James didn't speak. This is your last chance. No, James said. This is your last chance, Victor, to walk away with any dignity left. Blackwood's voice dropped. You think you're the hero in this story, but you're just a man who let a child go to war in his place. James didn't flinch. His eyes never left her face. She didn't go to war, he said. She built the weapon. Then he hung up. In his 30 minutes. The rain intensified. Sophia's code window blinked green. Intercepting preliminary hash signals, she announced. Being live. Sarah, you ready? Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. Regulatory ports are open. The secure pipeline is verified. James watched, heart pounding. A digital war, fought in silence. 10 minutes. Then, the first of Blackwood's accounts pinged. Sophia's algorithm auto-dagged it, redirecting metadata to federal servers. Dozens followed. But then hundreds. Millions. Billions. Blackwood's hidden empire, spanning 7 countries and 12 shell corporations. Real time. 1941 p.m. The precise second. The offshore accounts attempted the final transfer. But instead of vanishing into encrypted darkness, they collided with Sophia's firewall and lit up like fireworks. Alarms echoed in SEC offices. The Justice Department launched synchronized raids. James watched it all unfold like a man witnessing prophecy. He looked at his daughter, radiant in the screen-like glow, calm and precise, fingers moving like a pianist at the climax of a concerto. 30 minutes later, James's phone rang. Director Harmon, SEC. We've got it. Everything. Congratulations, Mr. Reynolds. You just helped expose the most sophisticated financial crime in U.S. history." James's voice cracked. "We did." That night, they didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no speeches, no toasts. Just a father and daughter curled up on the couch, watching the rain fall against the windows. Sophia rested her head on his shoulder. "Is it over?" she asked. "Now," James said. "Now it begins." Section 7. The Fall of the House of Blackwood. The news broke before dawn. Breaking seizes $4,700,000,000, 0 cents in hidden assets. Reynolds and child prodigy behind financial takedown. Victor Blackwood under investigation in the local. Child genius shopped Walmart. By 7:15 a.m., Victor Blackwood's name was plastered across every screen in Times Square. A man once synonymous with invincibility was now synonymous with corruption. In a guarded conference room inside the Department of Justice, Victor sat with his lawyers. His complexion, normally porcelain smooth and camera-ready, had gone ashen. They were playing recordings, surveillance audio, wire transfers, internal memos, voice print confirmed file naming offshore accounts, mapped to shell companies, and all traced by one algorithm. "Who gave them this?" Victor demanded, fury rising. A junior associate hesitated. "Sir, it appears it was the girl." Victor blinked. "What girl?" "Reynolds' girl, the one who spoke at that charity gala." His lips curled into a bitter smile. "Sophia, that little girl from the rain, the one who'd sold paper foxes. She'd just pulled the thread that unraveled his entire empire." Back at the apartment, James and Sophia watched the morning coverage in stunned silence. A montage of court raids, investigators carrying servers wrapped in plastic, executives escorted out of buildings in cuffs, reporters crowding gates shouting questions. "Is it strange that I don't feel happy?" Sophia asked. James placed a hand over hers. "No, it's not about happiness. It's about truth, and truth comes with weight." She looked down. "I thought it would feel like winning, but I just feel tired." He nodded. "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a very quiet kind of right." By noon, the storm got personal. News anchors began airing segments questioning Blackwood's character. Then his connections. Then his past. Anonymous sources came forward. Former employees, betrayed partners, abused assistants, whistleblowers. People who'd stayed silent for years, until now. The floodgates opened. At 3:00 p.m., the Justice Department filed a formal criminal indictment against Victor Blackwood. Securities fraud. Wire fraud. Heresy. Obstruction of justice. Money laundering. 20 counts. Denied. Victor's mugshot hit the internet before the ink dried. James stared at the screen. This man, this ghost from his past, looked hollow now, smaller, shrinking before the world's eyes. Sophia didn't speak. But her expression said what they both knew. It wasn't over yet. That evening, while James met with federal agents, Sophia wandered into their workspace. And she opened her private folder, one James hadn't seen. Inside, pages of equations, yes, but also drawings. Sketches of the bookstore awning where they'd first met. Her grandmother's eyes. Timeline of memories. Street corners, origami diagrams, safe routes. Taped on the inside of the folder was a photograph. Faded, a hospital ID badge. Name, Lena M. Alvarez. Occupation, nurse. Into status, deceased. Sophia ran her fingers over the name. "Grandma," she whispered. A knock came from the door. Sarah stepped in. "James wants you in the kitchen." James was pacing when she arrived. On the table was an envelope. From the Department of Social Services. Sophia's eyes narrowed. He spoke gently. They reopened your file after the press. A DNA marker hit in an old system archive. Sophia froze. He handed her the letter. Sophia Alvarez, your birth record has been located. Your mother's identity is now confirmed. Biological mother, Claire Monroe Blackwood. Biological father, Victor Anthony Blackwood. The room fell still. Sophia's face went blank. James stepped forward. We didn't know. Sarah checked. Your grandmother raised you under Alvarez. There was no record of Claire's marriage to Victor. Only that she died in a car crash shortly after giving birth. Sophia's mouth opened, but no sound came. I'm his daughter. James nodded slowly. You're not like him, he said quickly. You never were. You're your grandmother's child. You're mine now. Tears welled in her eyes. He knew about me. James hesitated. We don't know. He may have buried it, paid to erase it. Sophia's hands trembled. I took down my own father, she whispered. James stepped forward, wrapping her in his arms. No. You uncovered the truth. That's not betrayal. That's bravery. That night, the headlines turned poetic. The prodigal who exposed her own bloodline. Blackwood's daughter brings him to justice. In a secure wing of the federal building, Victor Blackwood sat stone-faced. A screen lit up. Footage played. Sophia's press interview, clips of her explaining the algorithm. A prosecutor leaned forward. And she's the one who exposed your infrastructure. Victor stared at the screen, then smiled. A strange, hollow smile. That's mine, he said. And then, quieter. She's better than me. Session 8. The girl who rewrote the future. 2 weeks after Blackwood's arrest, the world was still spinning. News anchors called it the most brilliant financial exposure of the decade. Tech CEOs were quoting Sophia's algorithm. Lawmakers debated new regulatory bills based on an 8-year-old's math. But inside their modest apartment above the old bookstore, James Reynolds was doing something far more difficult than testifying before Congress. He was learning how to be a dad. Left shoe goes on the left foot, not the right. Sophia looked up from tying her sneakers. I know, just thinking. You're about to give a talk to 4 university deans and a room full of donors. She shrugged. They're just people. I've seen worse. Remember the guy who tried to steal our pancakes at the diner? James chuckled. She straightened her sweater. I'm not nervous for me. He tilted his head. Then for who? She looked up. For the kids watching. The ones like me. I want them to know they matter, even when they're invisible. James felt a lump rise in his throat. You're not invisible anymore, he said. She met his eyes. None of us should be. The auditorium was packed. It wasn't a typical tech conference or academic forum. It was the inauguration of the Reynolds Foundation for Educational Innovation, a dream now made real. The crowd included policymakers, educators, families, and most importantly, children from shelters, foster homes, and underserved communities. Each wore a badge that read, Future Pattern Breaker. At the center of the stage stood Sophia, flanked by James and Sarah. She stepped up to the microphone. The room fell still. She was small, her voice soft, but her words struck like lightning. A year ago, I was selling paper foxes in the rain. I passed by. I wasn't seen, but then someone saw me. Not just the folds of paper I made, but the patterns I could see in the world. The ones most people miss. She took a breath. I say I'm a genius, but genius isn't a lightning strike. It's a pattern of effort, of survival, of never giving up. I lived on corners, I counted steps, I calculated safety. That wasn't genius, that was necessity. The audience was silent, eyes wet. Why we need is to stop treating brilliance like it only lives in boardrooms. It's on the sidewalks, in shelters, in kids who've seen more than they should. All they need is someone to notice. Applause thundered, and this time, Sophia didn't flinch. The program launched with 3 pilot cities. Children would be offered placement exams not based on grades but pattern recognition and logic challenges Sophia had personally helped design. They called it the Paper Fox Initiative, a nod to where it all began. That night, James found Sophia curled up in the reading nook. She wasn't coding or sketching algorithms, and she was writing, in pencil. "Working on something new?" he asked. She smiled. "Children's book," she said. He raised a brow. "About a girl who sees the world in numbers, who turns math into magic, and finds a family in the process." James knelt beside her. "It sounds familiar." "She's not me," Sophia whispered. "She's every kid who hasn't been found yet." In the months that followed, Sophia's life moved fast. She co-authored a paper on predictive modeling with MIT researchers, consulted with the FBI on cybersecurity breaches, appeared in a Time magazine cover story titled, "A Girl Who Rewired Wall Street." But she never lost her rituals, and she still read by flashlight, still preferred scrambled eggs for dinner, still wore the same silver fox necklace James had given her on their official adoption day. One evening, he asked her, "What would you have done if I hadn't stopped that day? If I'd just walked past?" She paused. "I would have survived," she said, "but maybe I wouldn't have grown." He wrapped an arm around her. "I thought I was giving you a second chance," he murmured. She leaned into him. "But maybe I was your first." 1 year later, Sophia stood in front of her university math cohort. She was now 10. Still the youngest on campus, still the sharpest mind in the room. Behind her was a display case in the foundation's new lobby. Inside it sat the first origami fox she ever sold, a photo of her and James from that rainy day, and a framed equation titled, "The One That Changed Everything." Mission 9. The Man Who Chose to Stay. It started with a skipped heartbeat. Then 2. Then 3. James sat alone in the cardiologist's office, listening to the rhythmic click-click of his EKG. Outside the window, the spring sun painted golden streaks across Lake Michigan. He used to look at that lake from the 52nd floor of Reynolds Tower. Now he looked at it from ground level, seated in a paper gown, waiting for news he didn't want to hear. Dr. Ellis closed the file. "You've pushed your body hard for years," she said gently. "And these last 18 months, the stress, the adrenaline, the lack of recovery, it's catching up." James stared at the floor. "My bad." She was quiet. "I need you to stop running. Not from anything, just physically. No late nights, no skipped meals, no ignoring pain." He forced a smile. "I'm not exactly in a position to retire." Dr. Ellis's eyes softened. "You're not dying, James, but you're running out of runway. Your daughter needs you present, not heroic." That night, he sat in the dark kitchen, sipping herbal tea instead of his usual scotch. Sophia entered quietly, already sensing something was off. "Bad news?" she asked. He nodded. "We're not what it used to be." She sat across from him, her small hands wrapped around her favorite mug, one with the words "Pattern Breaker" scrawled in blue marker. "How long do you have?" He laughed. "I'm not dying tomorrow, Soph." Something changed. He looked at her carefully. "For most of my life, I thought value came from building something bigger than yourself. But now, I think maybe the real legacy is showing up, staying, being here." Sophia's voice barely rose above a whisper. "You've always been here." James reached across the table. "Now, I used to exist in the same rooms, but I wasn't present, not really. Not for your mother, not for me, not until you." The next day, James declined 3 lucrative offers to return to the financial sector. He deleted the press inquiry, asking him to write a memoir. and instead, he walked Sophia to her university class. Just the two of them, no security, no interviews. Along the way, they passed a food cart. Sophia stopped. "We're selling tamales," she said. "You like tamales? Grandma used to make them. Wrap them in napkins so they stayed warm longer." James ordered 2. As they stood on the sidewalk, eating like tourists, Sophia looked up at him. "You could have gone back to the towers, rebuilt your company. Everyone wanted you to." He wiped salsa from his chin. "But they didn't know what I know." "What's that?" "This," he said, gesturing to the cart, to the street, to her. "This is the tower now." You began volunteering at the foundation. Quietly? Not as James Reynolds, financial titan. Just James. He ran the budgeting workshops for single moms. He fixed laptops. He taught kids how to open their first savings accounts. Sometimes he just sat in the library and helped kids read. He was finally building something that didn't need his name on it to matter. One afternoon, Sophia came home to find him asleep in the reading nook, a book on macroeconomics open on his chest. She draped a blanket over him and whispered, "You stay." He stirred. Oh. Then one evening, Sophia stood before him holding a thick manila folder. "What's this?" he asked. "My legal petition," she said, "to change my last name." James blinked. "I want to be Sophia Reynolds. I've been her for a while. I just want the world to know it." He reached for her hand, eyes glistening. "I thought I saved you," he whispered, "but really, you saved me." I grinned. We saved each other. The media caught wind of the name change the following week. Headlines shifted. To professional registered nurse, to promotion to professional registered nurse. Sort of disgraced tycoon or savior of... But Sophia didn't care. But she had math papers to write, kids to tutor, and a father to cook scrambled eggs on Sundays. One Sunday morning, as James sat at the table reading the paper, Sophia looked at him and said, "Do you miss your old life?" He folded the page slowly. "No, because I finally understand something now. I spent decades chasing the illusion of permanence, towers, titles, wealth, but the truth is, the only thing worth staying for is the thing that leaves no monument, just love." Sophia tilted her head. "You're being philosophical." He smiled. "No, sweetie, I'm being honest." Mission 10. The letter she was never supposed to read. The letter was found by accident. Sophia had been looking for spare graph paper. She was diagramming a new encryption formula. She pulled open James's bottom drawer, the one he used least often, tucked beneath archived tax documents and dusty notebooks. And there it was. A pale blue envelope, creased at the corners, addressed in neat cursive. For Sophia, when she's old enough. She froze. It wasn't James's handwriting. She turned it over. There's no stamp, no return address. Her fingers trembled as she slid a pencil beneath the flap and opened it. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with time. And at the top, in ink that bled just faintly from age, was a name. Claire Monroe. Your mother. She sat on the edge of her bed and began to read. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to tell you these things myself. And I am sorry. I am so, so sorry. Not just for leaving you, but for leaving you in a world where you might grow up thinking you were, every single day. You were born on a Tuesday, rainy, quiet, with soft jazz playing in the delivery room. You didn't cry right away. You blinked, looked straight at me, and then furrowed your brow. The nurse said, "She's already analyzing the lighting." I laughed, and I knew you were extraordinary. Sophia blinked hard. Her chest ached. She kept reading. Your father was brilliant, but not safe. Victor had ambition like a tidal wave. It could build empires or drown entire cities. I was young, too young. I didn't realize until it was too late that his love came with conditions. When I found out I was pregnant, he offered money, power, silence. But I didn't want you to grow up in a world where your worth would be tied to someone else's empire. So I left. I ran, changed my name, moved in with your grandmother, and every time I saw you build towers out of sugar packets or trace circles on the floor with your fingers, I knew I had made the right choice. Sophia clutched the paper, breath shallow. But there's one thing I need you to know. You were never abandoned. I got sick. Fast. Your grandmother promised she'd care for you, keep you hidden from the past. She was strong, fierce. She made me promise not to tell anyone about the cancer. Let her remember you alive, she said. But I couldn't leave without saying this. You are not his legacy. You are not mine either. You are your own. The world will try to define you, by bloodlines, by headlines, by algorithms. But I know who you are. You are the girl who will change everything. And you'll do it, not with power, but with grace, with empathy, with light. The final paragraph was smudged, as though the writer had cried through it. And if by some miracle someone loves you, really loves you, let them. Don't push them away because you're afraid of loss. Let them stay. Let yourself be known. You are my greatest joy. Always. Your mom, Claire. Sophia didn't realize she was crying until James walked in and knelt beside her. She held out the letter silently. James took it in, eyes scanning with practiced restraint, his jaw tight with emotion. I didn't know, he whispered. I found it in one of your grandmother's books. After we moved, I didn't want to give it to you too early. I was waiting until I was strong enough to read it, Sophia finished for him. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Sophia leaned into his chest. I miss someone I can't remember, she said. You don't have to remember her to carry her, James murmured. You already do. That night, she added a new object to the display case at the foundation. A folded letter, sealed behind glass, next to the origami fox. I titled it, Of Life-Altering Event. A week later, Olivia approached adult. The press never reported on the letter. She never told them. Some truths belonged only to the heart. But something softened in her after that. Her sharpness remained, in math, in code, in the clarity of her moral compass. But now, there was warmth. One afternoon, as they were preparing a shipment of books for the new foundation satellite in Atlanta, James asked, What's next for you, Professor Reynolds? Sophia thought for a moment. I want to write code that protects people and books that reach the ones who don't know how brilliant they are yet. He smiled. That's a long to-do list. She smiled back. It's a long life. But one thing would never change. Every rainy day, without fail, she folded a new paper fox and left it on the foundation steps. Just in case another lost genius passed by. Just in case someone else needed to be seen. Conclusion. The legacy was never in the towers. Sophia Reynolds never asked for a legacy. She didn't chase power, or headlines, or even recognition. And she chased shelter and safety. A place to rest her brilliant, burning mind. And James Reynolds, once the king of skyscrapers, didn't think he had anything left to give. But love finds you in unexpected places. Sometimes it's folded into a soggy paper fox on a rainy sidewalk. Sometimes it's in a child's question over scrambled eggs. Sometimes it's in a letter you were never supposed to read. Together, they rewrote what legacy truly meant. Not in billions. Not in buildings. But in the quiet courage to stay. To see each other. To protect what matters. Sophia's algorithm went on to change the financial world. But her greatest invention was not software. It was a life where one little girl from the streets could become a symbol of second chances. Not just for herself, but for thousands of kids just. She built classrooms where no one was invisible. She built systems where fraud couldn't hide. She built hope, equation by equation, day by day. And James? He chose love over legacy, fatherhood over fame, presence over power. As for the world, they never forgot the image of them, side by side on Capitol Hill, her small hand in his, both dressed in humble gray. The titan and the child, the fallen man who stayed, and the little girl who rebuilt the future. If you've ever felt too broken to begin again, if you've ever wondered if you could love or be loved after the fall, if you've ever passed by someone on the street and almost stopped, let this story remind you. The smallest act of kindness can unlock a lifetime of purpose. And sometimes, the one you save becomes the one who saves the world.